English study plane for talking. Young Alex, eyes fixed on English videos, yearned to speak fluently. The words danced on screens, a melody he could hear but not echo. His dream felt like a distant peak, shrouded in mist, daunting and seemingly unreachable for an everyday learner. He knew listening was crucial, absorbing sounds and rhythms, yet the active step of forming sentences remained a terrifying obstacle. It was a silent, internal struggle, day after day. The biggest hurdle wasn't grammar or vocabulary, though they had their challenges. It was an invisible wall, constructed brick by brick from fear of error. "I don't want to make mistakes," he'd whisper to himself, "but I always do. Why?" This constant refrain echoed in his mind, paralyzing his tongue. Every potential utterance felt like an impending misstep, inviting imagined ridicule. The pressure was immense. He decided to create an English study plane, not an actual aircraft, but a meticulously charted course for his linguistic ascent. This plane would be grounded initially, within the safe confines of his own home. No audience, no judgment, just him and the language. It was a radical idea, breaking free from conventional classroom anxieties and the public spotlight. A personal, private language lab. The first phase was simple: listening. He immersed himself in podcasts, documentaries, and interviews, not just understanding but absorbing intonation and natural pauses. English became the background hum of his existence, a constant companion. He listened to how other people talk in English, observing their cadence, their emphasis, their informal contractions. This passive intake felt manageable, a comfortable beginning. He started mimicking, silently at first. Repeating phrases under his breath, trying to match the exact rhythm and stress. It felt awkward, like learning to dance without music, but he persisted. This subtle, unpressured practice laid a foundation, a muscle memory for his mouth and tongue, preparing them for the more demanding task of independent speech. It was a secret ritual, building confidence brick by brick. Then came the scariest part: talking to himself at home. How to talk at home to yourself, he'd pondered for weeks. He designated a specific mirror as his English audience. Every morning, he'd stand before it, describing his breakfast, narrating his thoughts, or even debating imaginary points. The reflection offered no judgment, only a silent, encouraging presence, a safe space for verbal experimentation. Initially, the words stumbled out, disjointed and hesitant. He'd pause, search for vocabulary, and often give up mid-sentence. His voice sounded alien, clumsy, nothing like the fluid native speakers he admired. Yet, he pushed through the awkwardness, reminding himself this was the very first step for talking, a necessary stage of linguistic infancy. Each struggle was a small victory. He began recording these solo monologues on his phone. Listening back was cringe-worthy at first, highlighting every grammatical slip and awkward pronunciation. But over time, he started noticing subtle improvements, a smoother transition here, a more natural phrasing there. It was tangible proof of progress, motivating him to continue this unconventional, self-directed learning method. His confidence slowly crept up. The fear of mistakes still loomed, a persistent shadow. But now, when he stumbled, he viewed it less as a failure and more as a data point. "I don't want to make mistakes, but I always do. transformed into an opportunity to learn. Each error became a signpost, directing him towards correct usage, rather than a barrier to future attempts. This shift in mindset was pivotal. His English study plane began to take flight. The home environment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a launching pad. He expanded his solo conversations, discussing daily events, opinions on news articles, even fictional scenarios. He was building fluency word by word, sentence by sentence, without the performance anxiety of a live audience. This dedicated practice was his secret weapon. He started paying closer attention to how other people talk in English in movies and TV shows, not just for comprehension but for conversational patterns. He noticed fillers like you know, like, and how they were used naturally. He observed idiomatic expressions, informal contractions, and the subtle nuances of polite discourse. This deeper observation enriched his internal monologue. He compiled a small notebook of common phrases and expressions, not just single words. He realized that native speakers often use chunks of language, not just individual dictionary entries. This changed his approach to vocabulary acquisition, focusing on contextual usage rather than isolated definitions. It felt more organic, more aligned with real-world communication styles. The journey wasn't linear. There were days of frustration, where progress felt stalled, and the old fear resurfaced. He'd feel like giving up, questioning if he was truly capable of fluent English. But then he'd remember his plane, his commitment to the process, and push through, even if it meant just a few minutes of self-talk. Consistency was key. He learned to be patient with himself. How to learn English wasn't a sprint but a marathon, filled with small, incremental gains. He celebrated minor victories, correctly using a new idiom, understanding a complex sentence without translation, or completing a monologue without excessive hesitation. These small triumphs fueled his motivation, reinforcing his belief in the process. Gradually, the self-talk transformed. What started as awkward pronouncements became more fluid, more natural. The search for words became quicker, the grammatical structures more intuitive. He was building confidence brick by brick, not through external validation, but through internal mastery, proving to himself that he could do it. This internal shift was profound. He imagined scenarios where he would need to use English, ordering coffee, asking for directions, making new friends. He'd rehearse these conversations in his head, refining his responses, anticipating questions. This mental rehearsal was a powerful tool, preparing him for real-world interactions long before they actually happened. It reduced the element of surprise and panic. His listening skills sharpened dramatically. He could now discern subtle accents, understand faster speech, and grasp nuances he previously missed. Listen English was no longer just a task but a pleasure, unlocking deeper layers of meaning in media he consumed. This enhanced comprehension further boosted his speaking confidence. The two skills were intertwined. The internal "I don't want to make mistake but I always wife" started to fade, replaced by a more forgiving mindset. He realized that native speakers also make mistakes, hesitate, and rephrase. The pressure for perfection was an unrealistic burden he had imposed upon himself. Embracing imperfection was liberating, allowing him to simply try. One day, his roommate, a native English speaker, overheard him talking to himself. Instead of judgment, there was a curious smile. "You're really improving, Alex," she commented casually. This unexpected, unsolicited compliment was a powerful boost, the first external validation of his diligent, private efforts. It was a testament to his consistent practice. This small interaction sparked a new idea. Could he extend his English study plane beyond the solo flight? The thought was terrifying, but the recent compliment offered a glimmer of hope. He realized that interaction, though scary, was the ultimate test and a necessary component for true fluency. The next phase of his journey began to form. He decided to take a small step, a tiny one, towards real conversation. He started with simple greetings and farewells with his roommate, expanding beyond just hello or goodbye. He practiced asking about her day, commenting on the weather, initiating brief, low-stakes exchanges. Each successful interaction chipped away at his anxiety, proving it was possible. These initial conversations, though brief, were invaluable. They forced him to think on his feet, to respond in real time, unlike his rehearsed monologues. He still made mistakes, stumbled over words, but the world didn't end. His roommate was patient, understanding, and often provided gentle corrections or rephrased his awkward sentences. He started noticing how people speak English in casual settings, not just actors. He observed their body language, their nonverbal cues, the flow of their conversations. He realized that communication was much more than just perfect grammar. It was about connection, conveying meaning, and interacting with others authentically. This holistic view was transformative. His English study plane began to connect with the larger world. He sought out opportunities to use English, however small. Ordering coffee at a new cafe, asking for help in a shop, replying to comments online in English. Each interaction was a mini adventure, pushing him slightly beyond his comfort zone. The fear was still there, but manageable. He found online communities for language exchange, where people from different countries practiced speaking English together. This provided a safe, judgment-free environment with fellow learners, understanding his struggles. He joined voice chats, starting with listening, then offering short comments, gradually increasing his participation. It was a supportive network. The "I don't want make mistake but I always wide" mantra slowly dissolved. He understood that mistakes were not failures, but stepping stones. Every error was a lesson learned, a boundary pushed, a clearer path forward. He began to embrace the process of making mistakes, knowing it was an unavoidable part of authentic learning and growth. He realized that fluency wasn't about perfection, but about effective communication. It was about being understood, about connecting with others, even if his sentences weren't grammatically flawless. This realization was incredibly liberating, taking the immense pressure off himself and allowing him to relax and simply communicate. His study plane was now soaring. From a cautious takeoff in his living room, it was navigating increasingly complex airspaces of real-world interaction. He was engaging in longer conversations, expressing more nuanced opinions, and even telling short stories in English. The initial terror had given way to a quiet, growing confidence. He reflected on how to take first step for talking. For him, it was the mirror, the phone recordings, the patient's self-talk, and then the incremental steps with his roommate. It was a gradual unfolding, not a sudden leap. He understood that everyone's first step might look different, but the core principle was starting small and building momentum. He continued to listen English actively, but now with a conversational ear. He listened for how others managed awkward silences, how they clarified misunderstandings, how they showed empathy. His listening became a tool for learning not just vocabulary, but social dynamics within the English language. It enriched his overall communication skills. He started to see himself not as a student struggling with English, but as an emerging English speaker. This shift in identity was powerful. It wasn't just a language he was learning, it was a new part of himself he was discovering, a voice finding its expression in a different tongue. It was a journey of self-transformation. The fear of being judged, which had paralyzed him for so long, diminished significantly. He understood that most native speakers were encouraging and genuinely wanted to help. They appreciated his effort and persistence, valuing communication over grammatical perfection. This realization allowed him to take more risks. He even started thinking in English for short periods. Mundane thoughts, internal monologues, planning his day, he'd consciously try to frame them in English. This deepened his immersion, making the language an organic part of his thought process, rather than just an external tool for communication. It was a significant breakthrough. His initial English study plan for talking had evolved into a continuous learning journey. There was no final destination, only ongoing improvement. He embraced the idea that language learning was a lifelong endeavor, filled with continuous discovery and refinement, always something new to learn and explore. He realized that how to learn English was deeply personal. There wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution. What worked for him, the extreme focus on self-talk, the gradual introduction of external interaction, might not work for everyone. But the underlying principles of consistent practice and overcoming fear were universal. He began advising friends who struggled with similar anxieties. Start talking at home, he'd tell them, emphasizing the importance of a safe, private space. Don't wait for perfection. Just open your mouth and let the words come out, even if they're messy. His own journey became a source of inspiration for others. He encouraged them to listen English actively and critically, not just passively. To pay attention to the nuances, the fillers, the natural flow, and then try to replicate it. He stressed that observation was a powerful teacher, revealing the subtle complexities of real-world English communication. He shared his mirror technique, explaining how it helped him overcome the initial stage fright. Imagine yourself speaking confidently, he'd say. It builds muscle memory and mental preparedness for when you finally speak to others. It was about training the mind as much as the mouth. He even talked about his initial recordings, the cringe-worthy early attempts. He explained how they were crucial for tracking progress and identifying recurring errors, transforming mistakes into valuable learning opportunities rather than sources of discouragement. It made errors less intimidating. How people speak English became a fascinating study for him, not just a daunting comparison. He appreciated the diversity of accents and speaking styles, realizing there wasn't one correct way to sound. This understanding fostered acceptance of his own evolving accent. He learned that the desire to not make mistake but I always why was a natural, but ultimately limiting, human tendency. He now viewed it as a sign of progress, meaning he was pushing his boundaries, stepping into the unknown, where mistakes are an inevitable and necessary part of growth. His English study plane had flown through turbulence, clear skies, and even some unexpected detours. But it remained airborne, steadily gaining altitude, its destination becoming clearer with every mile flown, confident, natural English communication. It was a journey of relentless self-improvement. He began to share his story online, anonymously at first, then more openly. He wanted others to know that the fear was real, but conquerable. He described his methods, his struggles, and his breakthroughs, hoping to provide a roadmap for those feeling similarly stuck. His message resonated: start talking at home, take the first step for talking, embrace your journey. He emphasized that consistency trumps intensity, and small, daily efforts accumulate into significant progress over time, far beyond initial expectations. The Listen English component remained vital. He continued to broaden his exposure to different voices, topics, and contexts. The more he listened, the richer his internal language model became, providing more material for his own active speech production. He found joy in the process, no longer viewing Learn English as a chore but as an exciting adventure. The ability to connect with more people, access diverse information, and understand different cultures fueled his passion. It opened up new worlds. His journey illustrated that language learning isn't just about accumulating facts, it's about developing a skill, much like playing an instrument or riding a bike. It requires practice, repetition, and a willingness to fall down and get back up. The fear of mistakes, once a giant monster, had shrunk to a manageable size, a small annoyance rather than a paralyzing force. He realized that true confidence came not from avoiding mistakes, but from knowing how to recover from them. Alex, once timid, now regularly engaged in English conversations, both online and offline. He still had moments of hesitation, but they were fewer and far between. He was living proof that consistent effort, even in isolation, yields incredible results. His English study plane for talking was a testament to personal dedication. He built his confidence from the ground up, starting with introspection and self-practice, then slowly branching out into the wider world, one courageous word at a time. He understood that how to talk at home to yourself was not a silly exercise, but a foundational skill, preparing the mind and mouth for eventual public performance. It was a crucial stepping stone, often overlooked, but immensely powerful. The diverse ways how other people talk in English continued to fascinate him. He observed how accents varied, how slang evolved, and how formal and informal speech diverged. This appreciation for linguistic diversity deepened his understanding. His advice for how to learn English became simple: just begin. Wherever you are, whatever resources you have, start now. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect method. The journey begins with that very first, brave step. And so, his plane continued its steady flight, carrying him further into the vast, open skies of English communication. He was no longer just a learner, he was a speaker, a participant, a fluent voice contributing to the global conversation. The final piece of his wisdom: I don't want make mistake, but I always why can become I make mistakes, and that's exactly why I improve. Embrace every stumble, for each one brings you closer to your fluency goals. This shift in perspective is everything.